Welcome, everybody, to the breakdown once again here on Canadian Football Perspective. Thank you for being a part of the show. We appreciate you for being here, taking part with us, having some fun with us. At DT on OB is on the other side of the Zoom call. As always, Derek is fresh off a beatdown. We are recording
Hey,
this on a Friday
hey,
because we wanted to allow whatever was going to happen in Winnipeg, BC, the marquee game, really, I think, of the week for obvious reasons to play out. Boy, did it ever play out. DT, how was your night?
hey. Marsh. Honestly, I went into the game, Bombers and Lions, not having any real idea what was going to happen. Most
Yeah.
games I know, okay, what's going to happen. And in week 3, when BC was in Winnipeg, I thought, man, the Bombers are going to mash this team into a fine paste. The offense has put up more than 40, or the team has put up more than 40 the last 2 weeks. This is going to be amazing. And they just got lumped.
Yeah.
So in week 9 was the game I thought we might see in week number 3. And there are a million extenuating factors as to why that was. But this is the Bombers offense Bomber fans thought they could see. Best receiving core, best quarterback. The offensive line was phenomenal on Thursday night. Phenomenal versus what happened in week number 3. This is the Bombers team that I think Bombers fans knew was in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always amazed in the CFL. It's kind of one of my bones to pick, really, with like our coverage of the league at large, whether it's TSN or otherwise, just like, CFL.ca, anybody that does local radio like you, is that I love the CFL for this, and I also kind of hate it. The games we build up to be the game, the big one, very rarely deliver. Very, very rarely, because you end up getting like, this team, oh, these are two Titans up. No, Winnipeg significantly better. Like it looked like it last night. They just in every phase, in every way, back when BC played so well against them, kind of felt like Winnipeg had just an incredibly out of character anomaly game. And then we all took that as, well, it looks like BC's the better team for the remainder of the year. That's the way it's going to be. And it's like, it's not that BC doesn't have a chance to make noise in the playoffs and to push Winnipeg for the remainder of the season. I think we all respect them greatly, despite what happened last night. But it's like that version of BC that we saw last night, no chance of beating Winnipeg when they play anything remotely close to that. The thing that I always find funny in the CFL is when we blow these marquee games up, they rarely deliver. The ones that sometimes do deliver is like a gross, grimy Montreal Ottawa game in week 17 that goes to overtime. You know what I mean? Like I don't
Yeah.
think anybody saw Hamilton Calgary last year being the fantastic matchup that it was. I mean, Calgary and Saskatchewan always play each other very closely, it seems like, whether it's because of the Dickinsons or otherwise. But they had a game earlier this year that goes into overtime that was sensational. And it's always the ones that you don't really expect that make you go, man, I love this league. This is so much fun. I find so often when we really try to put it on a tee, it has a hard time living up to it. And I even felt bad last night because, like, and rightfully so, Dwayne, my buddy, in his analysis was going, Matthew Betts, look at this incredible performance. In the pregame hit that he did, he was like, Matthew Betts, he gets off the ball, he gave them trouble. This is what happened. We'll see if it happens again. Pregame, he highlights Matthew Betts in the introduction, all the rest. And then as the game goes on, you're watching it, and Dwayne is doing a great job of highlighting, okay, here's how they're dealing with Betts throughout the night. It was like he wasn't on the field. And
Mm-hmm.
it's, to me, that's the difference with Winnipeg between the team we saw that was like, whoa, what type of Bombers team is this early in the season that's losing to BC and giving up all these pressures, and Kolaris is on the ground every 5 seconds, versus, no, that's the Winnipeg team that we know. Like, Matthew Betts should not be leading the CFL in sacks. Like, Willie Jefferson should be at or near the top, as he has been throughout this year, because he's Willie Jefferson and he gets home to the quarterback a lot. It's just funny to me how sometimes we look at the big picture of it, and it's like, sometimes it almost feels like we curse it, where we hype it so much that it has no chance of delivering.
It was just such a turn, right? The Bombers were minus 24 in the first game. They were plus 36 in this one. A 60-point swing in the span of 6 weeks. And so much of that, and there were things that I made sure to point out on the post-game show. Like when we get to the third matchup on October 6th, I will remember that BC was on 4 days rest for this one, and the Bombers were coming off a bye.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of that plus 36 was accounted for by that, but certainly some, because like you say, Matthew Betts had 1 tackle when I last saw the stats, and that's not Matthew Betts in that game. We spent so much of the 2-hour pregame show talking about what the defensive line had done to the Bombers in week 3. 7 sacks. The first time in a Kolaris game, there'd been more than 5. By my count, 14 quarterback pressures. The only time this season it got over 9. Collaros was not under pressure. I haven't charted the game 5-6 times, maybe. And not sacked at all. Like, and there wasn't, I didn't really see on first glance anything special the Bombers did. There wasn't, there wasn't more sixth offensive linemen than they would normally run. There wasn't more fullback than they would normally run. They didn't run the ball particularly effectively with the running back early on in that game. That came later. That was honestly, I just walk away from that going, they didn't run a bunch of stick routes, right? 5 yards and bam, get the ball out of his hands. They're hammering the ball 71 yards downfield to Dalton Schoen right off the bat, right? So the only thing I can take away, and not having reviewed it, is those 5 offensive linemen just played so much better than they did in the first game. There wasn't Matthew Betts speed rushing Stanley Bryant inside. If he tried to do it, it didn't work because we didn't notice him.
Yeah, absolutely. The home run shots that you mentioned, to me, yes, my takeaway is the offensive line was significantly better, but it's also like Zach went into that obviously pissed off about the way that it unfolded earlier in the season. And Zach, without being angry, is a really good quarterback. Zach pissed off is the MOP runaway. And when he plays angry and with an intention to break your spirit, that's how you get shown. And, oh, you don't like that? Here's Dembski, drop it in the bucket. Or I'm going to go over the top to Lawler for an offensive pass interference that wasn't because the defensive back just overran the play. Like, all of these to me are great examples of Zach's downfield aggression. And we're often talking so much about how do we get scoring up? Should we squeeze the hashes? Should we do this or that? Or to try and create offense. What you need to create offense is to have quarterbacks like Zach Collaros and a system like Winnipeg that's not scared to go down the field because they trust the people that they're targeting down the field to play the ball well in the air. And if you miss a big throw, you'll come back and you'll make good on the next one. And like I remember throughout the start of the season, I think it was when I had BC on July 3rd against the Argonauts, I was going through the numbers on passes of 20 yards or more down the field. Opposing offenses against BC on passes of 20 plus in the air were 1 of 14. So I went back and filtered that and said, well, what was the one? And it was Carlton Agudosi in the first quarter against the BC Lions from that game that turned into a blowout. I don't know if there was anything there that they saw that they leaned on more in this game. I don't whatever the adjustments were that Winnipeg made, they obviously worked. But when I came away from watching the first quarter of the game here on Thursday night, it's almost it's a month to the day that I looked up that number of 1 of 14. How many do you think they gave up last night in the first quarter? 4?
Yeah.
Right. And they
went
the
first
opening
drive, right?
They went the first month of the season giving up 1, and then they just go this was not death by 1,000 paper cuts. This was death by the largest knife possible through your heart, and then just keep next one through the heart, next one through and to the point where I love Dustin Nielsen last night at one point. It's just like, that's a good old fashioned blowout. Is like this is everything that you would ever expect to see in a blowout between two of the top teams in the West Division.
Well, and think about how improbable some of that was, and just the balls that it takes from Buck Pierce and Zach Collaros. They get the ball because of a return penalty for their opening drive. They get the ball in the 10. They take a procedure call in the first play. Yeah. They're at their 5-yard line. What do they do on 1st and 15 from their own 5 with the goalpost in the way? They throw a 37-yard shot to Kenny Lawler. He spins to his outside to make the catch in pretty good coverage. The very next play, 1st and 10 from now the 42, whatever it was, boom, 70 plus to Dalton Schoen. And in 2 plays, they cover 105 yards. That's some stones, because if that first one to Lawler is not complete, you're in a massive hole, and you may give up points on the ensuing drive. And it was very noticeable how Zach was forcing deep balls to Kenny Lawler. Yeah. Like, he caught, I think if it was the touchdown one, that defender was shoulder to shoulder with Lawler, and he beat him for the ball. And then going left to right, he tried to force one to him in the end zone where Kenny was not particularly open, but you're like, he doesn't. These two, Collaros and Lawler, they don't care if Kenny's not really open, because they fully believe he's going to find a way to get open or get that football. And 200 yards in a game, plus a pass interference call drawn, plus he drew another penalty as well. You're like, oh, Kenny had maybe the biggest impact any receivers had in a single game this season.
I love the one in the back left corner of the end zone where Zach just gave him an opportunity and he got knocked away by Jalen Edwards Cooper.
That's the one.
Yeah, but I love that one because Kenny got up just laughing. He was like, dude, he threw it out of bounds. Like he was doing the whole like put the sword back in the holster and like all the DB things of like throw up the X and then this with this guy, the Big Ben handshake and all that. I'm like, and you could just tell Kenny's like, dude, I have like 200 yards. What are you doing? Like I'm owning the game right now. You made one play on a ball I had no chance to catch because it was out of bounds. But I wanted to ask you. There's a couple questions I want to hear asked because you are obviously boots on the ground and you're following this as close as anybody out there. The first thing is Kenny's delayed start to the season, getting him up to speed and back on the same page with Zach. I bring this up because talking in the CFL and TSN Zooms with Cody Fajardo yesterday ahead of the Saturday night Montreal Hamilton game. Basically, it's like Austin Mack is a game time decision. You've got Keon Julian Grant out of the game. Well, those two guys account for 60+% of their pass targets so far on the year. So where the hell Montreal is going to throw the football, I'm not sure against Hamilton. I do know against Hamilton, they're vulnerable to the pass. Their back end has been struggling. And the completion percentage for teams on deep shots is really, really high. And the pass efficiency is really high against the Tiger Cats defensive secondary. So they're going to take their shots. Maybe it's Tyler Snead, but I mean, he had those 3 touchdowns against Toronto. We'll see. You would expect to see maybe Hergy Mayala get some more targets. But the reason I bring all of this up is I said, like, Tyson Philpott needs to get some more love here. His first game back, I said, Cody, like, what was the deal with getting Tyson back? He goes, well, it was weird because he wasn't cleared to play until day 3 of practice. I hadn't thrown a ball to him since the second day of training camp before the game against Calgary on Sunday night. And he's like, so we didn't have any timing or chemistry whatsoever. And I bring up Tyson and Cody as a way to segue into Kenny and Zach. They know each other. They've played together before. They've spent full seasons together. But this year specifically, you would have to think that there would be some more of that recreating that bond between the two. How slow developing has that been? And is this just status quo for the remainder of the year, what we saw against the Lions?
Yeah, it was pretty quick this year, right? Because they spent the entire 21 season together. And then when Zach went to Winnipeg very late in 2019, they would have played that time together. But all of 21, they were together. And when it came to Lawler returning to Winnipeg, he was just so jacked about playing with Zach for all the reasons that.
Well, they tried to get him back in 22 at the trade deadline, right? Like
exactly because hey, he could put up 200 and a touchdown, and they who knows what would have resulted from the season had they been able to make that one work. So in training camp right away, like Lawler's the X. Boom, let's feed him the ball. He had a fantastic touchdown catch in the preseason game against Edmonton before his legal troubles jumped back in and cost him the first 6 games. But like he had 9 targets last week in his season debut.
Yeah.
That was absolutely. We're like, is he going to ease Kenny into the game, or are they going to try to get him a gimme touchdown to make him feel good? No, he's just going to hammer the ball to Lawler whenever he feels like it because they feel Kenny is so dominant physically and everywhere else that we're up to speed right now, and Lawler feels great about it. Kalaris is unbelievable. Like he was just ridiculous last night.
Yeah.
They
fear though, right?
None whatsoever.
Yeah.
None. Like this was one when Schoen catches that 73-yard touchdown, whatever it was. I'm sure you've seen the stats too because the CFL has a bunch of them. But Schoen on his catch rate is super low this season. It's in the 50s because on deep balls, 20 yards plus downfield, he had 4 catches on 17 targets. There were a couple of drops in there. There's some overshoots. There's some good defensive plays, but 4 on 17 targets. And you go, okay, that's low and that's just bad luck low to some degree as well.
Yeah.
Didn't care. Here you go. Here's one 45 yards downfield and shown just a fantastic catch at full speed and pulls away. And you go, Zach doesn't care. Like Zach does in the way that I don't care what's happened before this point. I know what these guys can do. So I don't care about the first 8 weeks. Dalton Schoen is a big play receiver. Boom. Here you go.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just looking up the average depth target going into last night. Because I mean, the thing people have to understand is when you see completion percentage when targeting a single receiver, it very much matters what their depth of target is because that's going to change the whole dynamic, right? The highest average going into week 9 was Dominique Rhymes from BC. 18 catches on 34 targets, an average depth of target of 20.5 yards.
Is
Down
that for, oh my gosh, yeah.
for the entire season. I'm just trying to find where Dalton Schoen is here in this list. He is at
17?
17.8. Yeah,
Yeah.
so he is looks like tied for second in the CFL in average depth of target. So that checks out, right? Like and also because of the number of targets that Schoen gets and the average depth of target, he actually led the CFL in total depth yards, right? When you add together all of those averages and the number of targets, 924 yards worth of targets going into last night, and that number easily is above 1,000 at this point after last night's game as well. So, it's an interesting dynamic between Lawler coming in, Schoen being there, Dembski. It'll be very, very fun to watch.
Again.
I know Dembski's just that
Dempsey's
dude.
awesome.
No, what I do have one thing that I get frustrated watching Nick play. This is a totally unfair criticism because he's awesome. In the open field, my man makes terrible decisions. Like I love watching him catch it on a screen or, a tunnel screen or they slip him out of the backfield or they shovel it to him underneath or it's on a counter on a runner. He leads the CFL in the last 5 years of him touching the ball and you see the roadrunner feet starting to go and you see how many blockers are out in front and you're like, oh shit, he's going to score. And then he runs right into 3 people and you're like, damn it. Come on, Nick. Like they set him up for so much success. And I love when he gets in the open field, but there was a run, I want to say it was in 21. He had like 3 or 4 straight games where he should have had a touchdown. And every time he'd catch a little 5-yard in, be running across he'd be like looking for a block. And then all of a sudden he'd be like, stutter, turn back the other direction and run into 2 people. And you're like, damn it. Like I could never do anything he does. Never could, even at the height of my powers. But there's so many times where I'm like, I just want you to have 20 touchdowns in a year because it feels like you could, if you could just make people not even miss in the open field, because he does, if you could just make the right decisions sometimes in the open field, because he's so good.
Oh, so good. Dembski on the corner route. We had him on the post-game show a couple of games ago, and I said the words I've said the most as the voice of the Bombers are Dembski on the corner route, because man, he sells the crap out of that thing, and he has hit just about every dime defensive back with that move. Moncrief, Regum, just all of them last season. He just toasted them all, and you go, God, he's special. And oh, by the way, he's one of Winnipeg's finest.
Yes, not to be overshadowed as well. Zach Collaros, not overly active on social media, but he tweeted out after that over-the-shoulder catch in the end zone last night. It's not the Willie Mays anymore. It's the Dembski. And you think back about it, like if they ever build a statue of Nick anywhere in Manitoba, it's probably got to be looking over the shoulder and having it drop right down into his hands, right? Because like that to me is he's caught, whether it's from the field side where he's playing the inside slot in a 3-pack or a 4-pack and he's running that deep over crossing route, or if it's the corner route from the boundary, he catches it over the shoulder and gears down to catch it over the shoulder as well as anybody I think that I've seen in the CFL while I've been covering it, which is up on a decade at this point. And it's just there's nobody like him when he plays the ball. Can we agree he plays the ball in the air as well as anybody in the CFL? I would have to say, like, maybe not jump ball wise, but in terms of understanding like time and space and when to accelerate and when to slow down and when to use his hands and when to late hands to try and fool the defensive back. I think he's just so crafty with playing the ball in the air.
I'm glad you said late hands, because he's just, you really noticed that a couple times this year where he's running the deep crosser and then it's just boop, because the ball, I'm not tipping anything off. And you're like, whoa, I've said, whoa, late hands from Dembski. And it takes me a second to process. Oh yeah, he 100% means to do that. And I don't know how he does that as well. Right. But like in baseball, like it's the Jim Edmonds catch. In football, like the straight over the top one is just the worst.
Impossible.
Looking this way, fine, but straight over the top is just the worst. Rashid Bailey just about broke his spine trying to do one a game ago because he bent so far backward. But yeah, I struggle to think of anybody who has the same over the top skills as Dembski. I think that's a good pull by you, because he is fantastic. Oh man, he's good.
He's fun to watch.
He's so good.
The other question I want to ask you here before we move off Winnipeg is, I talked about pissed off Collaros being pretty dangerous. Winnipeg has some of the best fans and the best crowd in the CFL. You can tell whether you're in person or you're watching on the television. And last night felt even up 20, up 25, up 30, it was kind of an angsty crowd. It felt like because of what happened against BC early in the year. In person, did it feel different to you last night? The crowd itself, the energy, the enthusiasm, the hell yeah, we are still the Bombers? Because that was what I was feeling coming through the television. We had a lot of crowd shots of people who you're up 30 points and there's a pass interference call, or even the Woody Barron jumping through the line of scrimmage and trying to convince everybody, no, I swear I saw something. And
Yeah.
then they call offside against him, and he starts laughing, and the crowd is like, ha! Like, like no, no.
Yeah.
The crowd was not giving an inch at all to BC last night. They wanted every single little
Oh,
piece of that game they could get.
100%.
Yeah.
They were still mad at every call. On the Woody Barron one, Chris Kolinkowski, as he's coming off, admitted, yeah, I flinched. But the officials got Woody Barron. So bless our reporter Christian Amell for picking that one up from the sidelines. So Woody was not incorrect with his assessment of that. But no, the fans were in it to the end. And yeah, everything that went BC's way that maybe was close,
Yeah.
they were angry at. When Big Hill gets penalized for hitting Keon Hatcher too hard, people furious.
Yeah.
Totally clean hit. It just happened to be a 6.4 on the Richter scale. Furious.
Yeah.
Even up 36, furious. Because yeah, hey, by the way, yeah, this is the best game the Bombers have played this season on offense and defense. And stop trying to take that away from us. We're celebrating. It was impressive. There are, though it was a 50 burger, as I kept saying on the radio, 50 points. There were still some things that you go, I wonder when Janarian Grant can come back, because Greg McCrae's struggling to catch that football, and that's not a great sign for a guy you want to be a returner. But so I fell into it wasn't perfect, but it was pretty damn great for the Bombers last night.
Yeah, I agree. Before we move on to the rest of the games the week here in week number 9, just want to point out to our good friends Fox 40 helping us out here on CFP. You can master your game plan with Fox 40 coaching boards. Choose from a range of clipboards and carry boards to help with your sideline needs. Visit fox40shop.com to shop coaching boards and more. Take 15% off your entire order using the code CFP15. It is Toronto Calgary coming up this evening here on a Friday night football matchup out west. Bit of a short week for Calgary. They're also coming off, basically the zero practice kind of week, and they've also been going through some injuries and all the rest. So we'll see what they end up looking like. Toronto still undefeated, coming off of touchdown Atlantic, and then they travel back, and then they travel west. I'm really looking forward to seeing, and I could say this every week, but Chad Kelly versus the opposing quarterback. This week it happens to be Jake Maier, and the reason I'm wondering about that is that Jake Maier is extremely resilient, sometimes makes some questionable decisions, puts the ball in some not so great spots. But he just keeps battling and battling and battling. And I think of Chad Kelly very much the same way. He doesn't really have the same questionable decision making, because I feel like they're really trying to coach into Chad where to put the football at the right time, at the right spot. But both of these guys kind of have the makeup for what could be a really fun game, which is whatever happens, they just keep playing. They don't really fold. Their body language doesn't change. They just keep slinging and slinging and slinging. And it's the thing that we saw from Dustin Crum up against Calgary in the Ottawa win out there in overtime. But it's not necessarily the same way, because Crum obviously a little bit more of the run game focus. And I feel like this might be the game where Chad gets an opportunity, especially with Dinwiddie and Mace and like the understanding of what Calgary does and trying to take advantage of some of those things. When the Argonauts have gone out west in the last couple of years, it seems like there's been a little bit more risk taken by Toronto than if they were playing, say, on the road in Montreal or something like that. I think it has the potential for a really fun one. Whether or not it turns out, we'll find out tonight.
Yeah, Mayor's so interesting. I was looking at props for tonight's game, and Jake Maier to not throw an interception was like plus 225. So basically they're saying that there's a 30% chance he doesn't throw an interception, somewhere around there. And I went,
well,
really?
That Toronto
Maier?
turnover margin, like differential,
Yeah.
is blowing my mind. And every time I go through and I do the weekly stats when I'm making my prep boards, I'm like, oh yeah, here's the turnover margin, and Toronto's plus 16, 12 turnovers ahead of the second place team. I'm like, how in the hell have they done this?
Yeah, and it's totally unsustainable, right? The record, I was just seeing if I could pull it up. The record for turnover ratio in a season is maybe in the 30s. So it's not going to be like that forever. But bless their hearts, they've driven that to 6 wins. Oh, pardon me. Best turnover ratio was Edmonton at 81. They were plus 40, plus
Oof.
41. Yikes! Can you
I
imagine? Yeah,
I have been told by Matthew Shinetti, who was talking to Josh Bell, the defensive backs coach with the Argonauts, they've set their goal this year, not necessarily in terms of turnover margin, because you can't control what the offense is going to do and if they're going to be giving the ball away. In terms of takeaways, the Argonauts have set their goal at 40 for the season. Toronto wants 40 takeaways on the season. That's what they're aiming for.
The 1995 Edmonton Elks had 87 takeaways. Wow, football is a different game now. Oh my gosh, that is stark. Edmonton at 89 had 84 takeaways as well. Yeah, that's. I'm wondering how many third down turnovers are included in that, and Toronto's defense. As I look at it, I'm like, oh, the offense is fine, the defense is fire, right? And BC. Here's the thing that after the BC Winnipeg game made me think is, I feel like I'm going to need to discount Toronto, BC, and Winnipeg. Their games against every team that's not Toronto, BC, and Winnipeg. I feel like I'm just going to need to discount that, because looking at BC's past schedule, they got lumped by Toronto. They hammered Winnipeg. That's a quality win, but it's also a quality loss. And then there's 5 other games of like, well, who the hell cares? These are bad teams. They shut out Edmonton twice. Shutouts are great, but Edmonton is not a good football team right now. Win against Calgary, blah, blah, blah. The Bombers schedule, okay, they beat Hamilton week 1. They lost to Ottawa. Okay, there's a bad loss, at least record-wise in that one, and situation-wise as well. Losing to BC. BC's a good team, fine. They lump BC. BC's a good team. Quality win, quality loss. I feel like I'm just going to start discounting games against the other 6 teams and just figure Toronto, BC, and Winnipeg, whoever wins the season series is maybe the best team in the CFL, because there's just not a lot else. Like if Toronto goes to 7-0 because they pick off Mayer twice and generally beat Calgary into oblivion, I'll be like, okay, yep, that's kind of what I thought. Toronto has not been real healthy, and I mean, yet they roll, right? Question mark at quarterback coming into the season. Not really a question right now with Chad Kelly, because everything seems pretty good, but I need to see him get tested. I need to see the Winnipeg game coming up in late September, and then I need to see the playoffs. But fantastic. Toronto, they're just a horse right now. Like
I agree.
Fantastic.
This was a conversation I had with somebody in the league basically like a week ago, though, was, okay, Toronto hasn't really shown any deficiencies. And I wrote a piece for CFL.ca this week where Christina Costable asked me to, can you attack why the Argos are 6-0 kind of thing? And so I gave it some thought. And instead of doing, the hardcore numbers analytical breakdown of here's where they're having success and this is what it means, I basically said, listen, they've got belief from a championship last year. They've got new uniforms, which made them feel a little bit fresh and excited going into the season, which never hurts, especially with guys that it seems like you introduce new uniforms and it creates a jolt of energy for whatever that's worth. You've got the 150th year of Argonauts football, the celebration of the history of the organization, which seems like that's given them some perspective on, oh, wow, this is really special. Like we're doing this for the first time in 88 years where we're 6-0 kind of thing. Which, by the way, funny part at the end of that article that I wrote was that I meant to say that the last time that the Argonauts were 6-0 88 years ago, that bacon was 25 cents a pound. I forgot to put in the decimal point, so it actually reads as $25 a pound. I'm like, ooh, that reads pricey. Yeah, not so sure about that one. I don't know if anybody's caught that, but I did when I read back through it, and I was like, but I ended up kind of looking at the big picture of this, and like, special teams are solid. Defense has got a ridiculous amount of turnovers they're creating. And yeah, the offense is holding their own. Running game is supporting them. They're doing well on first down, whether it's through the air or on the ground. What is the Argonauts' offense if Chad Kelly goes down? It's now a running attack with Cam Dukes.
Yeah, like, they're in the same boat everybody but BC's in, right?
And
if they lose their starter.
That's the question, is like, Toronto's really the only team that hasn't been hampered by either starter injury or starter poor performance. Edmonton. And so I am wondering if Toronto ends up facing that kind of adversity, can the defense really carry them through like a 6-week period if Chad, rolls an ankle or something?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the question here. And that's why when you talk about Toronto, BC, Winnipeg, whoever wins the season series, I think is the best team in the CFL. I have no doubt that Winnipeg ends the season as the best team in the CFL right now at the end of the regular season. Like, wins the West, sets himself up as usual. BC will be chomping at their ankles like they always are. Calgary will see if they can figure it out. I don't have any belief in Saskatchewan or Edmonton at this point in the year. And in the East, it's Toronto and everybody else, because it's just going
Yep.
to be the typical Toronto, like Ottawa beats Hamilton, Hamilton beats Montreal, Montreal beats Ottawa. They're just going to keep trading wins and losses and going like this in circles and circles and circles. And Toronto's just going to get enough wins to win the East Division. And then it becomes a question of, at the end of the year, are the Argonauts good enough to repeat? Is Chad Kelly healthy? And is that defense good enough to somehow take down BC if they were to upset Winnipeg and or Winnipeg? Like, we're sitting here at the beginning of August. We've still got August, September, October. Like, we're 4 months away essentially from the Grey Cup. That's the question to me at this point. I've seen enough football to know, to your point, it's Toronto, BC, and Winnipeg that will be playing in the Grey Cup in Hamilton come November.
Yeah, unless there's some sort of shenanigans in the East Final and Toronto falls on its face. To me, there were only, on the Chad Kelly point, there were only two teams for me coming into the season that were not totally screwed if they lost their starting quarterback. And they were Hamilton because Matthew Schiltz, but they've now had multiple quarterback injuries. And what do you do with that? And then BC as well, because Dane Evans. We've talked about this. I'm not the biggest Dane Evans guy, but as far as, he's a top 9 quarterback in the CFL in my mind, which means he could well be starting for some other teams. And to have him behind Vernon Adams, who's also a top 9 quarterback, I thought, okay, you're covered in that case. But Calgary, Tommy Stevens, Edmonton, I didn't. Their quarterback situation is a whole thing. Trevor Harris going down in Sask has been brutal for them. They're done. If Winnipeg lost Kolaris, Drew Brown's a great guy, but Zach Kolaris is the MOP of the CFL, and just I don't know what that would look like, but it would not look the same. So everybody, now it's just a race to stay healthy. Right? Like, it's just let's how can we be healthy? If you're the Bombers, how does Kolaris stay healthy? How does Jackson Jeffcoat play more than 12 games this season, which has been his exact number the last 4 years? If you are Toronto, we got to keep Chad Kelly healthy. I'm trying to think of what else are there. Wynton McManus needs to be healthy at the end of the season. Jamal Peters missing this week. We'd love him to be healthy. That back six, let's keep them in one piece. There are just, if it's Kelly, it becomes the question mark, and we spin the wheel of, is this Tyree Adams or is this Taylor Powell, right? Yeah. Is it a guy who will perform? Is it Dustin? Is it the Crumback in Toronto? Like something like that. We start thinking of nicknames, or is it, okay, now we're in a lot of trouble, right? And we're investigating. So yeah, it's now of those 3 teams, you just how can we stay healthy for the playoffs? Because the West, we were saying this. Let me throw this to you, Marsh. I had this as the hot take in the pregame show yesterday.
Yeah.
Only 2 teams in the West will finish above 500.
Oh, man.
Agree or disagree? Well, 2-5 Calgary, 3-4 Sask, 0-8 Edmonton.
Well, I know that Calgary is about to look a lot better when they play back-to-back weeks around Labor Day against the Edmonton Elks. That's going to be. They
might be 2-8 by that time, though, right? Or 3-8.
It's true. Yeah, especially, this Toronto-Calgary game tonight's actually pretty interesting for Calgary's larger outlook, I think. But despite the fact it's not a divisional opponent, I still think it will carry a lot of weight in the next month or so. Calgary hasn't had a losing season since when?
They 07.
Yeah, so 2007. I was trying to remember off the top of my head because I was talking about that with Dwayne Ford yesterday, and he was just saying, I think Calgary's going to sort their stuff out, but I'm like, they're the swing vote on that one, right? If you're doing the over-under of 2.5, the 2.5 right in the middle of that is the Calgary Stampeders, because Saskatchewan's not getting to 500. Edmonton's not getting to 500. And that's why people were saying, oh, wow, the crossover could be alive. And it's like, we actually had this conversation during our Zoom yesterday with my producer and Dwayne and Matthew Schnetti as well, where we're like, can you imagine? And again, we know this is not going to happen. So before everybody in Western Canada decides to light this podcast on fire, can you imagine Hamilton as a crossover team, having to go in and play against Calgary, on the road against
Winnipeg or BC?
Yeah, Winnipeg or BC on the road in in a semi like that, replacing Calgary, Saskatchewan, and Edmonton kind of thing. And then it's just funny to think about how people in the GTA, Ticats and Argos fans would be like, oh my God, we might get a Ticats Argos Grey Cup in Hamilton. Can you imagine? It's like, No, I cannot imagine because that will not happen because Hamilton will not beat BC and or Winnipeg in back-to-back weeks in order to make the Grey Cup. So even if a
Yeah.
crossover does happen, if somehow Hamilton were to squeak by and get that spot, but I also think Montreal is probably better set up, which again, Saturday night, Montreal Hamilton. I think
Hmm.
Montreal's better set up to be the team that crosses over than Hamilton at this point. I would expect Hamilton and Ottawa to be the bottom of the East Division the way it looks right now.
Yeah, I think Hamilton probably plays Toronto 4 times this season, which may be their undoing. Is
Yeah.
you'll have to get to 9-9. Just on the Calgary part, currently 2-5, 2-5, right?
Yeah.
They play the Argos, the Lions, the Bombers, and the Argos in their next 4 games.
Oof.
That smells like 3-8, 4-7. 4-7 would be amazing to take 2 of those games from the way those teams look. That said, we're depending on how bad Dane Evans' injury was from last night's game, because if they've lost now 2 quarterbacks, they're in a world of trouble.
I took the dogs for a walk at halftime. Imagine my amazement when I came back and they showed a shot of the sideline. Dane was in street clothes and VA had his uniform on. When I left to walk the dogs, VA was in street clothes and Dane had his uniform on.
Yeah. There's a third quarterback conversation we need to have there when you're having to dress the injured guy when you intended to never play him in that game. Yeah, but Calgary, I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Calgary's 2-9 going into Labor Day.
Wow.
Against the 0-12 Edmonton Elks. Like, it's unlikely, but it's not totally impossible because they're 2-5 going into a brutal part of their schedule. Brutal part of their schedule. So I have hopes for Calgary tonight to do something to kind of save their season, because yes, they've won 10 games in every 18 game season from 2008 to 2022. And how do they can't possibly get 10 wins this year. I can't. That would be a savior of all time type season.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think your hot take is spot on with that one. DT's play-by-play responsibilities are all done for the week. He is wrapped up with a Thursday game. You hope you get to enjoy a little bit of the August long weekend. My weekend is Saturday, Montreal, Hamilton in Hamilton. Nice to not have to travel for that one. The problem is I board a plane out of Toronto at 8 a.m. on Sunday morning, and I am calling the Riders game 11 hours later in Regina. I'm doing the same day fly in, call the game, fly back out on Sunday, but it will be very fun to call a game for you. Thanks to Fox 40 for supporting everything we're doing around here. DT, let people know where they can get a hold of you.
I'm on Twitter at DT on OB. I'm there all the time. X680 CJOB is the place to go for all your Bomber needs and all your reports, and me screaming 50 in Doug Brown's ear for 2 hours last night. It was pretty great. And now I can't wait to see, I can't wait to watch them put up only 25 against the Elks, and we go back to going, what's wrong with the Bombers?